Well, let me see if I can stop this right in welcoming you and asking you to spend the 2 hours with me. I did some martial arts before, but I've been told that I should not mess with my next guest because he happens to be the son of a man who was a 6th Dan martial artist. He is a sensei, Wushu Kwan and Shotokan karate is his area. So if I unnerve him this morning, I will keep my distance. The People's National Movement Senator and Public Relations Officer, also the candidate for San Fernando West, is Mr. Faris Al-Rawi. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning to you and good morning to Trinidad and Tobago. I had no clue that you knew that my dad is a serious martial artist and that the rest of us also follow suit. So kudos to you for your good homework.
Well, it's good homework, but it's also, a word to the wise. Don't mess with man.
It's often good to be underestimated. It's a good advantage.
I hear that. Now, let's talk about the politics because you're not just pedigree in the martial arts, you're also pedigree in politics. You come all the way back from Lionel Frank Sukaran. Tell us about that upbringing and what influenced you and give you the passion you have to have ascended right now to the post of Public Relations Officer of the PNM and now a candidate for San Fernando West.
Well, I wouldn't use the word pedigree because I think that everybody in Trinidad and Tobago is equal in opportunity for public service.
Touché.
I think that it has to do with your upbringing. And I can tell you this, as a member of the screening committee of the People's National Movement, I have had the pleasure of seeing so many excellent children produced of public service families, people engaged in social and community activity. And that's much of what my life was growing up. Growing up with my grandfather, my mother, and my father. My father in Iraq is a very socially engaged person as well, and so too is our family there. But in Trinidad and Tobago, my mum epitomized in many senses public service and social commitment. And my grandfather and grandmother were very, very, very dedicated to the passion that is public service. My grandmother in the hospital in San Fernando in particular, in the local government organization, the predecessor to the city corporation, and my grandfather in local and in general politics. Everything from law and constitutional reform down to just getting your hands dirty and getting the jobs done. So that sort of upbringing, which was certainly solidified by excellent enterprises such as the scouting movement or karate or, engaged in all the activities we did in San Fernando, be it working as a volunteer in the hospital. All of us who grew up together, and there's so many of us. I'm just one of very, very many young men who went to school together and who are all equally engaged in their societies. So I'm nothing remarkable in that sense, just a product of a good San Fernando upbringing.
Now that I got you all relaxed and you had your cup of coffee, now let me start throwing the darts at you. Let's talk about this election coming up here. This election coming up here is where all the attention is placed. One of the areas that folks are talking about that you equally have addressed on the hustings is the question of accountability, openness, fairness, participation, impartiality, accountability, honesty. These are the tenets of good government and governance, and you would agree with that. The question is, how does the PM government propose to ensure these necessities are followed, particularly when we all agree there has been a total breakdown?
Well, it starts with your selection of personalities to engage in this enterprise. And that's where our screening committee has been hard at work and where the party structures have been hard at work in trying to produce the best people to represent their constituencies, but also to serve in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago and to engage in the business of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The second aspect is through the discipline of your political leaders' experience and knowledge. And there is no gainsaying that Dr. Rowley has had 30 years plus of political experience, and that we are very pleased to be led by him. He's a very disciplined and organized and intelligent man that really sweats an issue, if I could put it that way. He allows us to interrogate these issues on an open table forum, and he's very much demonstrated that by opening up the PNM, for instance, in our one-man, one-vote positioning. Next, we propose legislative reforms, and in particular, we're dealing with parliamentary code of conduct which has to be applied into the parliament. So no more is one permitted to have allegations hanging over your head and still sit in the saddle. Whilst we saw, for instance, in the PNM, people like Frankie Khan and Eric Williams, under an allegation by Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, then brought by a fellow named Dansam Dansuk, it was Kana Prasad Bisesa who brought this to the parliament. These gentlemen stood aside, and it was understood that you should stand aside. They've been vindicated, by the way, completely and totally, and the DPP is now prosecuting the same man who brought what turned out to be an inveterate untruth to the parliament through Mrs. Prasad Bisesa. But they've been vindicated and had to wait for their vindication. So that code of conduct, and I'm giving you a real example, if you can't have the situation where PNM people stepped aside, and you see it in a government where numerous allegations hang over heads as this government has had, then we propose to legislate that into I can't call it legislation, but it's the standing orders of the parliament by adopting a code of conduct. We then propose to apply the public procurement legislation side by side with a very, very important thing that does not exist in Trinidad right now, and that's under the supervision of a general accounting office. So you no longer hear of the Auditor General reporting on X entity 10 years after X entity dealt with something. It's dealt with contemporaneously. So if you add that to the pot and you have an automatic, I must justify $1. Take, for example, life sport in that matrix which we propose. The minute life sport started with a $6 million budget, expended what is expended, and then reached $500 million, you would have known inside of the same financial year how much you spent by way of a report to Parliament and what it was spent for and whether the dollars matched up with what the cost is. Small example inside of there to bring this to life. They were paying for lunches in life sport, something close to $50 a lunch, when the school feeding program sells it for $9 to $12. So you know something was wrong right there if it was being reported to the Parliament.
Understood.
The last thing, very important thing, is campaign finance reform. As you know, we have been to the Organization of American States. We have looked at model general legislation. We are the only political party in the last 5 years to have attended these events, and we have committed to campaign finance reform. And it's important. Campaign finance reform on a piece of paper called the law is meaningless unless you amend your revenue authority. Let me explain that.
Indeed.
Unless you're able to match up from Board of Inland Revenue, from the VAT payments, etc., how companies handle themselves and to whom payments are made if a person in political life. Unless you're able to do that in a real-time, meaningful basis, then things can be hidden.
And that, at the end of the day, is the important thing. It must be done in a real-time manner. Campaign financing is one of this. The voice you're hearing is that of Faris Al-Rawi. He's a guest senator, Faris Al-Rawi. He's also the PRO of the PNM. We are in a truncated mode only because we had a number of other guests already lined up. But I do want to continue this area of accountability with you, Mr. Al-Rawi. What kinds of checks and balances are going to be put in place to monitor, investigate the disparity of government workers, including ministers' incomes and newfound lavish lifestyles? Why am I putting so much emphasis on this? Because there is a disconnect, a believability. There is a feeling that when you get into government, that is your passport into the money. So the public now have to reconnect with the reality of what's going on, and they can only feel comfortable if, in fact, we have the checks and balances in place to monitor what is happening. And when we see these irregularities, something like a RICO statute is looked at and say, hey, maybe this is what we need to put in place to deal with those who take illegally from the trough.
And you must understand this. Dark spaces of corruption exist where you have a failure to implement real-time contemporaneous checking. So you can have the best laws on the books of Trinidad and Tobago. If you don't match them up side by side with an ability to check in this year what happened in this year, then you're in trouble. And that's where we are entirely new and novel to the approach and policy which we prescribe. No other political party is talking about the kind of accountability which I've just mapped out for you in just a few examples, where you connect the suite of laws together with how you operationalize the laws. It's very important because we have an accounting system in our budget, our annual budget, which really is archaic. It's called an accrual basis system. You go out, you say, this is how much money I need, these are the people who need to receive this money in terms of state enterprises, etc. And then there's no accountability at the end of the year for what you spent that money on, what your value for expenditure is. The rest of the world has moved to what we call whole of government accounting, WHOLE, where the entire entity has to come forward and say, this is what we purchased in terms of value for money, here's how much we spent, here's what we spent it on, here is the audit in respect of the expenditure. That's the only way we avoid a water treatment sewage plant, like the Beetham plant, costing by the engineer's estimate $400 million, $500 million less by the engineer's estimate to what the contract was given. That's where you do a Cuba interchange beautification project where the engineer's estimate is $10 million, yet SIS gets the contract for $35 million. All of these things disappear when you manage to put them together under an accountability matrix.
We are covering an area of a lot of contracts that are being signed that folks are saying were bad contracts. For instance, in the United States, there's a doctrine called the executive necessity doctrine, whereas if they look at something that was agreed to and found not in the interest of the nation, it not being the best deal in the world, they can void the contract. Is there any such thinking going on here where one may have entered into contracts on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago and it found to be not of absolute necessity, particularly with the downturn in the economy that is anticipated as a result of tumbling oil prices?
Yes, the answer is a stark, glaring yes, and I'll tell you where it is. It's in the public procurement law. And let me explain our position on that. So the public procurement law, which the PNM drafted together with the government in the Joint Select Committee, has the ability to void a contract. What we complained about is that the public procurement law has a huge hole in it. It's actually two holes, and we intend to address those. The public procurement law does not deal with the disposition or sale of state land, and it also has a feature in it where the procurement regulator, who is the person entrusted with the supervision of this law and making it happen, the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago can fire that person just upon notice. We objected to those two things, and we insisted to the government, look, it's senseless if you have billions of dollars of land that you are not allowing the procurement regulator to supervise how the government of Trinidad and Tobago gives away that land. Again, I will call SIS as an example. It's been reported that they have sat on and acquired, by way of adverse possession, 26 acres of land in Caroni. They fenced up 26 acres and they occupied 26 acres. And when we brought that to the national attention, it was only then that the state entity said, well, yes, they may have fenced it, but we understand they're about to apply for the land. Now, that is just not on. And what we're saying is, if you are an island where land is precious, you cannot put a big hole in the bottom of the bucket that is procurement legislation laws and not allow for the procurement regulator to supervise that. And secondly, no cabinet ought to have the authority to dismiss a procurement regulator just because the cabinet doesn't like that person. What we prescribed was that you have to bring it to Parliament and give your reasons why. You can still carry the motion because you have the majority, but you must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago why you are getting rid of the procurement regulator. Let me give Trinidad a very good reason why this is important. The Contractor General in Jamaica effectively brought down the Bruce Golding government in Jamaica. The Contractor General has such significant power and is so untouchable that when the issue of state resources and contracts was brought to life, Golding had to step down. And what we're seeing is that it is critical for Trinidad and Tobago we must have an independent, insulated regulator. And if you're going to get rid of a regulator, tell the people why. It can't just be that the cabinet does that.
Senator, I have a very limited period with you. The next time I expect you, I will make sure to give you a big part of the table. Unfortunately, this morning I'm squeezing things in, but that is very important. As important as one thing I must get with you before you leave is to talk about San Fernando West, because you're the candidate for up there. And you said that you have not seen the, let's say, the separation, the distancing of ethnicities up there as you have seen in the rest of Trinidad and Tobago. I am happy to hear that, and I am surprised of that. However, I will ask you, in addition to if you want to answer that, what is your prognosis for the needs of the people up there and who they will choose? Clearly, you will say it's you, but tell us why.
Well, I don't prescribe to people to vote for me just because they should, because they're angry with a government. I, in fact, ask people, as I've met every single person in San Fernando West, and those who I met, who I've not met, they just weren't home the 2 or 3 times that I went to their doors. But we asked them to look at our philosophy, our process and structure and personality. I advocate that the PNM and that I, in San Fernando West, am a good choice because we genuinely believe that San Fernando needs to have a very strong advocate who understands the needs of San Fernando. When we have complained that the UNC has been disrespectful to the people, we mean it in the fundamental sense that when you roll out a candidate 2 weeks before a general election, and that candidate cannot even meet the people of Trinidad and Tobago in the constituency, it's just not to meet the people, it's to meet the issues on the road, the broken drains, the putrid rivers, the vagrancy problem, the traffic, etc. So that's where engagement in San Fernando has been meaningful. And I'm sure that by now people can expect that I'm a strong advocate in the causes, and I take my work very seriously. I'm a born and bred San Fernandian. Everything that is good in my life in terms of my upbringing and commitment and the beauty of San Fernando's grace comes home and sits well, and we definitely work in a structure where we believe San Fernando has the capability to do what it needs to do. We need to have the space at the national table to do it. San Fernando is at the cusp of dying. We have crumbled. The institution and architecture of San Fernando has crumbled. Our public spaces are decaying. We have a terrible disparity between the haves and have-nots. And unless you understand the necessity of spend, things get lost. I'll give you an example. My opponent in San Fernando West, Razia Ahmed. I like Mrs. Ahmed, but let me put it to you this way. Mrs. Ahmed is on papers today about to sponsor millions of dollars of worth of fireworks on the San Fernando Hill as her gift to San Fernando. Millions of dollars in a huge display. And San Fernando West cannot even get drains cleaned by the government of Trinidad and Tobago because local government has starved them. We have people, 650 people, living in a rubbish heap at Hatter's Pan Yard with rats running across the table where children eat. I mean, tell me if you don't think that the millions of dollars in fireworks on one night, literally money being burnt in the sky, couldn't be spent instead on buying school books or cleaning homes or doing things which we have engaged in our small, meager PNM opposition campaign. We have done so much public work for the benefit of people by creating jobs, cleaning communities, etc., sending children to school, training them. I mean, that's what I mean by being dislocated and unconnected with the people of San Fernando West. It's a pity. I mean, I really condemn that kind of approach because there's so many people that could do with the meaningful assistance of millions of dollars of state money, because it's now been revealed that NGC is funding part of this as well. I mean, this is just terrible for Trinidad and Tobago, and I can only pray that people see the decency of approach that we take and the sustainability of approach that we take in the PNM.
All I can do, sir, is wish you the best. It is a pity that my time is so truncated with you this morning. In Arabic, Faris means knightly or chivalrous, and Al-Rawi means the bringer of knowledge. So the clarity that you brought here this morning, I thank you for it, and I trust that the folks of San Fernando West heard you, and I wish you and the PNM all the best for the upcoming elections.
Thank you very much, and for the opportunity to share my perspective this morning. God bless you all.
And God bless you too. Take care, sir. Thank you so much now.